Do you drink coffee? Chances are you do. About 2 out of 3 American adults drink it daily, and it's not just 1 cup. On average, people who drink coffee drink 3 cups a day. And because I wrote Eat to Lead and taught nutrition at the George Washington University School of Medicine grad program, people ask me questions about food, about nutrition, and about coffee. It's one of those things we consume daily, and sometimes we wonder, are we doing the right thing with this? Popular questions I get are, should I switch from coffee to tea for the antioxidants? How much coffee is too much? And my recent favorite, might coffee be making me happier? In this episode, I'm answering all those questions and sharing a little something I call strategic coffee drinking. It's a more intentional way to use coffee to boost energy. And at the end, I've got a short but eye-opening physiology lesson on how caffeine really works in your body, how it interacts with your brain and your hormones to shape how you feel your energy. Caffeine isn't just a pick-me-up. It's interacting with key systems in your brain and body. And when you understand how it works, you can stop relying on it reactively and start using it strategically. So get ready to level up your latte. Your coffee routine is about to get an upgrade. This is Lucy Gable, integrative leadership coach and trainer, author, and speaker. And this is Leadership, Life, Health, and Happiness. Do you remember when you first started drinking coffee regularly? I first discovered coffee in grad school. Not college, not high school, not grade school, grad school. I didn't grow up liking coffee. My dad drank it regularly, but I didn't like the taste. And that fancy, sweet dessert kind of coffee drink just wasn't a thing at the time, so I didn't get hooked. And the first time I actually enjoyed it was one day at my grandparents' house when my cousin made me a coffee drink full of milk and sugar. Of course, it tasted like a milkshake, and that I loved. It didn't make me a regular drinker. I don't remember exactly when in grad school I put two and two together and realized working on my thesis was much less painful when I had coffee. It was around the same time I noticed when I had coffee, I was much more awake in class. I could listen more attentively. I could remember information better. And I even felt more outgoing. I was wondering if that was a thing, but that's when I started drinking it more regularly. Caffeine is famous for its ability to reduce drowsiness and restore mental clarity, and the research backs it up. Studies show it can improve reasoning, memory, reaction time, attention span, even accuracy. And it can help with pain relief too. And you'll find out just how that works in this episode. Before I start sharing the research with you, I want to say that when I talk about the research, I'm talking mainly about the pure coffee without this added sugar and other kinds of milks, because that would just take us into a whole other realm of information and conversation. So we're just talking about pure coffee here. One of the questions I get asked by people most frequently about coffee is, should I force myself off coffee and drink more tea for the antioxidants? I'm going to answer that with a statistic you may not have heard. Something you may not know is that for many Americans, coffee is their major source of antioxidants. Yep, even though fruits and vegetables are the ideal source of antioxidants because they have so much more variety and more vitamins, minerals, fibers, and phytonutrients. It's probably not surprising on the whole, though, that in the US, we truly do ingest more coffee than fruits and vegetables. But yes, coffee is not just a pick-me-up, it's an antioxidant powerhouse. Antioxidants in coffee include caffeine, caffeic acid, chlorogenic acid, polyphenols, melanoidins, trigonelin, cafestol, and coeol. And yes, you heard right. I said caffeine is an antioxidant because it's been found to be able to scavenge free radicals all on its own. A great study I read examined the association of coffee drinking with all-cause mortality. And they studied 230,000 men and 173,000 women who were between 50 and 71 years of age. And they followed them between 1995 and 2008. So that's about 13 years. And after they adjusted for tobacco smoking and other potential confounders, they found a significant inverse association between coffee consumption and all-cause mortality. In case you need a refresher, inverse association means when coffee drinking goes up, these health risks go down. Inverse associations were observed for death due to heart disease, respiratory disease, stroke, injuries and accidents, diabetes, and infections. Other studies have also shown inverse associations between coffee drinking and biomarkers of inflammation and insulin resistance. Now, of course, I have to remind you also that association doesn't mean causation. So we do need more studies to find out if the coffee was directly responsible or if it was something else that these coffee drinkers have in common. But honestly, if you ask me, this study is a pretty powerful one. So back to the first question. You don't have to force yourself to switch to tea for antioxidants. Coffee has them too. They're different kinds, of course, so a little tea now and then is still a great idea. But coffee's definitely pulling its weight in the antioxidant department. So now you know about coffee's antioxidant effects. But let's be honest, most people aren't drinking it for the antioxidants, right? We're drinking it for the kick, the alertness, the ability to push through an afternoon slump or power through a mentally draining day. I remember a time when I was taking evening classes in grad school and I needed some help driving home after those classes. So I decided to try espresso because I really didn't want to have all that fluid in my system when I was driving home for an hour in DC traffic. So I tried that espresso from the coffee shop on campus and hated the taste, but loved the effect. At the time, I was so happy with the way it helped me extend my day. I didn't even think to wonder if it was going to affect my sleep. Did it affect my sleep? I'll let you know soon enough. But what I want to say is that popular media will report that you shouldn't have caffeine after a certain time. Maybe you've heard noon. You might have heard 3 p.m. You might have heard 5 p.m. And mainly it's suggested that you don't have it after a certain time because it can keep you awake at night. But like most everything in science, especially when it comes to food and humans, there's a lot of nuance when you start diving into it. What you may not have heard from the popular media is that we all process caffeine differently. How long it stays in your system, how strongly it affects you, and how much interferes with your sleep. A lot of that comes down to your genetics. So there's no one size fits all caffeine cutoff. But there are things you can learn to figure out what works best for you. And we're going to be unpacking that as we go through this episode. First, I want to talk about the half-life of caffeine. Half-life is the amount of time it takes for the concentration of something to be reduced by half. So in this case, we've got an idea of how much time it takes for caffeine to process and be brought to half of its concentration in the body, or more specifically, in your blood. And that's the half-life of caffeine. In adults, the half-life is about 5 to 6 hours. But there are lots of individual differences. Main differences that are big in general are that smokers can clear caffeine up to 50% faster than the average And pregnant women can clear caffeine 1.5 to 2 times slower than the average person does. We also find that genetics can make you a fast metabolizer or a slow metabolizer of caffeine. And of course, you can be somewhere in the middle. So the half-life of caffeine in your body could be anywhere between 1.5 to 9.5 hours. But let's say you're right in there with the average. If it takes you 5 to 6 hours to get to half the concentration of caffeine, it'd take you 10 to 12 hours to get to zero caffeine in your blood. Now, can you fall asleep with a little caffeine in your system? Most likely. And a lot of us, I'm sure, do. But if you want to know the time of day you need to stop drinking coffee, you're going to want to experiment and get to know your own body. And it's not just the time that you drink it, it's the dosage. For example, if you want caffeine later in the day, you might have a smaller dose and it'll clear faster from your system. That right there is strategic coffee drinking. It's what I do. I enjoy all different kinds of coffee and I pick and choose what to drink depending on what I want or need it for. And I'm going to help you figure that out for yourself as well. Next, I'm going to give you a few examples of how I drink strategically to help you create your own strategy. Back to the espresso drink. I drink espresso when I don't want a lot of fluid, but I need a little caffeine. And yeah, sometimes I have one before dinner, usually when I'm traveling and in a different time zone when I need help staying awake. Of course, I can't drink it right before bed, and after dinner is too late, but some people can. And now you have a little idea about why. I typically drink cappuccino in the morning because the milk adds to my protein and calcium intake for the day. And because it has protein, carbs, and fat like a teeny meal, sometimes it'll help me get through my morning workout if I need to do it before breakfast. And if I drink it along with breakfast, it extends the time that it takes for me to get hungry for lunch. There's one more coffee strategy that I've recently added into my routine, and that is dry brew coffee chews. Have you heard of them? One day, my husband brought home a few of these little packages, and he said, it's basically dehydrated coffee with dehydrated milk. Want to try it? And of course, I was thinking, okay, it's dry coffee. It probably is not going to taste too good, but I'll try it, sure. And yet, it was delicious. It tastes like little toffees. And as I'm eating it, yes, I'm eating my coffee. I'm looking at the ingredients and I find out that there's 1 cup of coffee in this little bite. And it's sugar-free with no artificial sweeteners, which I can't stand. And it's only 35 calories. The dehydrated milk is what makes it sweet. I said, oh my gosh, these are amazing. We need to have these at home. After some searching online, we found it on the internet. We bought a bag of them, and I found them to be the most convenient thing, especially for travel. We put them in our suitcase and we keep them in a hotel room. And that way, if I don't have a good coffee maker in the room, I don't have to get dressed and go outside for my first cup of coffee. I just have a dry brew and drink some water. It's also great when I'm leaving for the airport early in the morning and I need to focus on making sure I have everything. It's just one less thing I need to think about. And also, I'm a klutz in the morning, especially when I've had less than my 7.5 hours of sleep. So this is one less thing I can spill. And I try not to use the bathrooms too much when I'm flying. So it really helps not to have to ingest that extra fluid that it requires for me to get the caffeine I need in order to be awake to go through the airport. Obviously, I think dry brew is a great invention. I think everyone should know about it because it really fits into strategic coffee drinking. So I reached out to them and they're sponsoring this episode. And if you'd like to try it yourself, they're giving you, as a listener, 20% off your first order when you click the link in my description or go to drybrew.com and use the code LucyGable20. Of course, all of this will be down in the show notes for you. And if you get some, I'd love to hear what you think about it and how you use it. So I just gave you a few of my strategies for coffee drinking. Here are a few more. So, first of all, if I'm sitting, writing, and researching, to keep my brain alert and laser focused, I need more caffeine than usual. And if I'm working all day at the desk, I need to have a few servings throughout the day to keep my brain focused. But if I'm researching and I'm going to see clients later, I have to taper that amount of coffee because the amount that's good for me while I'm sitting in my silence and solitude is too much for sitting and talking with someone. That same amount will cause me to feel jittery and have less patience and make me want to interrupt. And speaking of that, if I'm going to do a talk or a presentation, I'll drink very little caffeine because once I get in front of an audience, my adrenaline is going to kick in. And combined with caffeine from the coffee, it'll make me feel like I'm having a strong case of anxiety. Any nervousness I have, it'll push me through the roof. So I like to ride as much as possible on my natural adrenaline high those days. I was saying that in grad school, I loved how espresso made it so I didn't have to drink a whole cup or more of fluid to get that caffeine energy to drive home in the evening after class. Did I notice it disturbing my sleep? Actually, I didn't. What I know now is that little shot of espresso probably had less caffeine than the regular coffee I used to grab from the chain coffee shop on campus. I had no idea at the time. And honestly, it'd be really difficult for me to find out because there wasn't much research on caffeine for a long time. And there's even less research, even now, on the amounts of caffeine in different kinds of coffee. Do you know how much caffeine is in your go-to cup? Knowing your brew can mean the difference between a smooth buzz and a jittery spiral. So let's talk about what's really in your cup and why it matters. Research finds the amount of caffeine in your coffee depends on a number of things, like the species of coffee, the brewing method, and even the person making it. We also know now that caffeine in a cup of coffee varies throughout the world. For example, it's approximately 140 milligrams of caffeine in a cup in Northern Europe and 50 milligrams in Southern Europe. That's a lot of difference there, right? One particular study I read from Poland found a higher than average caffeine content in coffees made in franchise shops compared to coffee made at home. And that's most likely true in the USA as well. According to the USDA database, 1 cup of brewed coffee in America is about 95 milligrams of caffeine, and 1 espresso is 60 to 65 milligrams of caffeine. So, contrary to common belief, the caffeine you get in an espresso isn't more caffeine than regular coffee. Now, when you go ounce per ounce, it does have more caffeine, but it's a smaller dose. So an average espresso has less caffeine than the average cup of coffee. And of course, when I say cup, I mean 8 ounces. And a serving of espresso is typically 1 ounce. When you have your specialty coffees, like lattes, cappuccinos, etc., they use espresso. So if you want to know your caffeine intake, you can ask how many shots of espresso are in that coffee you're ordering. And in case you don't already know, most places will have no problem adjusting your drink with more or less espresso. Just like most places don't mind putting in more or less sweetener or different kinds of milk. It's not a problem. If you're a Starbucks drinker, you may already know they post all of their nutrition info online. And from my quick review, their 8 ounce cup of coffee has somewhere between 150 and 200 milligrams of caffeine. And of course, anything larger than 8 ounces is going to go over 200 milligrams. So I just gave you some numbers. Of course, you can use them as is just to decide what kind of a drink you want to get at any given time, but you can dial that in a little bit more. The fun part is that you get to listen to your body and find out your perfect zone, the place where you're energized, but not edgy. And when you do hit that zone, coffee is no longer just a habit, it becomes a performance tool. Stick with me to get more on that. How much coffee is too much? It's another common question, but this is also going to help you figure out how to use coffee and caffeine for your best performance. According to the US Food and Drug Administration and the European Food Safety Authority, the daily total caffeine intake to avoid safety concerns is about 400 milligrams total per day, with no more than 200 milligrams at any one time. And if you're pregnant, no more than 200 milligrams in a day. Now, you are going to remember the numbers I just gave you in the last segment and realize, well, if a regular cup of coffee is what you're drinking, you're not going to want more than 4 of those. And if it's a Starbucks, you're going to need to think about that again, right? But something also to take into consideration is, for example, the study I quoted about all-cause mortality. There were categories of people who drank 6+ cups of coffee per day, and they apparently did fine. They were also in that list of people who reduced their risk of all kinds of diseases. So you're going to want to remember that it's not necessarily how much coffee you drink, but how much caffeine is in your coffee and how your body processes it. And that's where you need to do a little research on yourself to experiment with how different amounts make you feel, different kinds of coffees, different times of the day, so you can get into that energized but not edgy zone. So, what are these safety concerns we're talking about? Well, caffeine acts on the central nervous system, triggering short-lived effects like an increase in heart rate, an increase in blood pressure, and an increase in urination. Peak concentrations of caffeine in your blood happen about 45 minutes to 2 hours after you drink it. That's a big difference, right? 45 minutes to 2 hours. So it obviously differs for different people. It's up to you to pay attention to that. And of course, you're going to feel the strongest effects during the peak. And obviously, the more you drink, the more intense the effects are going to be. If you drink more caffeine than you should have, then you can get heart palpitations, headaches, nervousness, GI problems, unnecessary anxiety, restlessness, insomnia, and irritability. I sound like a medicine commercial, don't I? But this is what I was talking about earlier. You can gain that edge when you know your body so you don't feel these negative effects. Severe overdoses of caffeine are rare, but they can be serious. I mean, disorientation, hallucination, psychosis, seizures, heart arrhythmias, and rhabdomyolysis. And it takes a lot of caffeine to get a fatal dose, but people have done it. That dosage is estimated to be about 150 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So it's a lot, but people have gotten there. And despite some media reports, studies suggest that caffeine is unlikely to increase risk of atrial fibrillation or increase risk of cardiovascular disease. But if you have heart problems, you should talk to your doctor about it for sure. The most common negative effect of caffeine is its mild drug-like dependency. If you're drinking it daily and then stop suddenly, you can feel headaches, irritability, that energy dip. So if you're thinking of cutting back, don't go cold turkey. Taper it gradually and give your body time to adjust. Now, here's where it gets especially relevant if you're someone who values focus, clarity, and high performance. High performers often don't realize that caffeine isn't just a pick-me-up. It's interacting with key systems in your brain and body. And when you understand how it works, you can start using it strategically. This is your behind the scenes tour of what caffeine actually does, how it keeps you awake, sharpens your mind, and yes, even influences your mood and motivation. To do that, we need to start with a key player in your body's energy system, adenosine. Adenosine is a compound your body naturally produces throughout the day. And the more physically or mentally active you are, the more it builds up. As adenosine builds, it makes you feel increasingly relaxed and eventually sleepy. Here's how. When adenosine binds to the receptors in your brain, it signals your muscles to relax and your alertness to drop. But it doesn't stop there. Adenosine also blocks the release of several key neurotransmitters that are responsible for mood, memory, motivation, and pain regulation. This is why, by the evening, as adenosine builds up, you feel less sharp, less upbeat, and even a bit more sensitive to discomfort, especially if there's pain in your body. But the human body is amazing. During sleep, your body breaks down and clears out adenosine. That's one of the reasons why you wake up feeling more refreshed, alert, and emotionally balanced. But when you don't get enough sleep, adenosine doesn't fully clear. And that's why you might wake up feeling sluggish or moody or less able to tackle the day's challenges. Caffeine competes with adenosine for those same receptors in your brain. It essentially blocks adenosine from doing its job, so those sleepy signals never get delivered. At the same time, caffeine may even help boost the release of those feel-good neurotransmitters. So you feel more awake, more alert, more focused, and yes, sometimes even in a better mood after you've had caffeine. And here's another strategy you might want to try. In the morning, your body already gives you a natural boost. Your cortisol levels naturally rise, helping you wake up. And adenosine is also naturally low. So you can ride the wave of your natural energy rhythms by waiting an hour or two after waking up before having your first cup of coffee. And that way, you work with your body's own systems. If you don't know how long it takes for your body to clear caffeine, it's easy to accidentally mess with your sleep quality. You might still be caffeinated at bedtime, making it hard to fall asleep. Or you may fall asleep just fine, but have just enough caffeine lingering in your system to reduce the quality of your sleep. And when that happens, adenosine doesn't clear, you wake up tired, you reach for more caffeine, and the cycle continues. So if you're having trouble sleeping or waking up tired, start experimenting with when and how much caffeine you consume in the afternoon. Doesn't matter if it's tea or coffee or energy drinks. It all counts. So now you know, coffee isn't just a habit. For you as a high performer, it's a tool. And when you use it with intention, it can support your energy and your leadership, life, health, and happiness. Don't forget to click on my link and try dry brew coffee. Let me know in the comments if you got to experimenting, and if you did, what did you find out? And of course, if this episode makes you think of any questions I didn't cover, let me know that too, because I really only skimmed the surface of all things coffee and caffeine. If I get a number of additional questions, I'll answer them in a future episode. This is Lucy Gable. I'll talk to you next time.